morning, everyone. Today, our group will present Chapter 4, Sense Relations. In linguistics, words do not exist independently. Their meanings are connected to other words through different relationships. So, in this presentation, we will explore how words relate to each other and how these relations help us understand meaning more deeply. First, we need to understand two important concepts introduced by Saussure: syntagmatic and paradigmatic relations. Syntagmatic relation is about positioning how words combine together in a sentence. Paradigmatic relation is about substitution, how one word can replace another. For example, in the sentence, "The girl is pretty," we can replace pretty with ugly or polite. That is paradigmatic relation, but the other, the pretty girls, shows syntagmatic relation because the words work together in a structure. Next, this slide introduces the major type of sense relations. According to John Lyon, meaning is not isolated. A word gains meaning through its relationship with other words. There are two main categories: substitutional relations, also called paradigmatic relations, and combinatorial relations, also called syntagmatic relations. Besides that, we will also discuss other important relations such as hyponymy and meronymy. In substitutional relations, words can replace one another because they belong to the same grammatical category. For example, the words is pretty, ugly, polite, and rude. All these adjectives can appear in the same position in the sentence. This shows that language allows us to choose among words within the same categories. Unlike substitutional relations, combinatorial relations focus on how different grammatical categories work together. For example, the pretty girl. Here, pretty is an adjective and a girl is a noun. They cannot replace each other, but they combine naturally to create meaning. Next, we move to hyponymy. Hyponymy is the relationship of inclusion. A more general word is called a hypernym or superordinate, while a more specific word is called hyponym. For example, color is hypernym. Red, yellow, and blue are hyponyms. So, each specific color belongs to the larger category of colors. To explain more clearly, hyponymy is the relationship in which the meaning of one word is included in another. For example, a rose is a kind of flower, so rose is hyponym and flower is a hypernym. One important feature of hyponymy is the formula A is a kind of B. For example, a rose is a kind of flower, matching is a type of working. This helps us organize vocabulary into categories and understand hierarchical meaning. Next, let's move on to symmetrical relationships. Some called hyponyms can refer to the same concept in different forms. For example, autumn and fall, movie and film. These pairs have two-way relationship because they share nearly identical meanings. Now we look at asymmetrical hyponymy. For example, a cow is an animal, but an animal is not always a cow. This means the relationship only works in one direction. Other examples include a cat is an animal, but an animal is not always a cat. A rose is a flower, but a flower is not always a roads. A car is a vehicle, but a vehicle is not always a car. And next, let's move on. Hyponymy and transitive relation. Hyponymy is also transitive. If an iPhone is a smartphone and a smartphone is a device, then an iPhone is also a device. The transitive relationship help us build semantic hierarchy. Next is Meronymy or the part-whole relationship. Unlike hyponymy, Meronymy is not about categories. It is about compositions or parts belonging to a whole. For example, a branch is a part of a tree. Examples of Meronymy include CPU, monitor, and keyboard are parts of a computer. Arms and legs are parts of the body. This relationship is also transitive. If a drive is a part of CPU and the CPU is a part of a computer, then the drive is a part of the computer. This slide gives more examples: pictures, page, book, drive, CPU, computer. Again, this demonstrates the transitive nature of part-whole relations. Here, we compare hyponymy and meronymy. Hyponymy, as you can see, a cow is an animal, and this is category relationship. Meronymy, a mouse is a part of computer. This is a part-whole relationship. So, although both connect meanings, they function differently. Next, let's move on to lexical gaps.
So now let's start this session with a very familiar example. When we look at our family tree, if we want to talk about a father and mother together, we have the perfect overarching word parents. A brother and sister combined are siblings. But what happens when we try to find a single everyday English word that includes both an uncle and an aunt? We draw a blank. There is one. This missing piece in our vocabulary is exactly what we call a lexical gaps. So what is lexical gap? Lexical gap refers to the absence of a word in a particular place in a lexical field of a language, denoting an object which does exist in the culture in which the language is used. This leads us to our first question. Can we have specific terms or cohomonyms without an existing general category word about them? The answer is yes. For instance, chair, table, and bed naturally group under the superordinate term furniture. However, if we group pen, pencil, and chalk, there is no single, standard everyday lexeme that acts as their umbrella term. We have a gap at the top of the hierarchy. And question 2 asks, can there be a lexical gap at a place in the hierarchy where we would expect a term to be? Again, the answer is yes. Gaps can appear anywhere. As illustrated here, we have a perfect category name for eating utensil, which is cutlery covering fork, knife, and spoon. But when we look at drinking vessel, like a cup, glass, and mug, we lack a single everyday English word to categorize them together. Lexical gaps are everywhere if we look closely enough. And now let's move on to our next concept, markedness. Words often exist in pairs where one is the neutral default, called the unmarked term, and the other has an added specific feature called the marked term. This happens in two ways. Formal marking involves adding a physical element, like adding an S to head to make heads, or to large. On the other hand, semantic marking deals properly with meaning. Old is the general, unmarked term for age, while young is semantically marked because it is restricted to only one end of the age scale. And this table compares the two types clearly. Formally marking is based on the physical presence or absence of specific linguistic forms, like prefixes or suffixes. Its focus is on grammar and word formation. Semantic marking, however, is based solely on the meaning of the words and lexical distinction. Simply put, formal marking changes the physical shape of the word, while semantic marking changes its underlying meaning. And our final topic is componential analysis. According to Richards and colleagues, this is an approach that analyzes a word by breaking it down into a set of meaning components or semantic features. We use a binary system of pluses and minuses. For example, a man processes the feature human, male, and adult. A boy shares the human and male features but carries a minus sign for adult. This allows us to see exactly where meanings overlap and where they differ. And now, let's look at a bigger example, cattle versus horses. Here, we use four features, bovine, equine, adult, and male. Look at the first line. A bull is an adult male cow, so it gets a plus for bovine, adult, and male. A cow is female, so it gets a minus for male. And now look at the babies, the calf and the foal. Notice the plus minus sign for male. Why? Because gender doesn't matter here. A calf can be male or female. In semantics, we say this term is unmarked for sex. And as you can see, this matrix shows exactly how words are built from simple meaning features.
Now we move to another part, which called entailment. Entailment happens when the truth of one sentence automatically makes another sentence true. Let's look at the example in the slide. John was killed. Entail, John died. This happens because the meaning of the verb kill already includes the meaning of die. If someone is killed, that person must die. So, when we hear the sentence, John was killed, we automatically understand that John died, even if the second sentence is not directly stated. However, the opposite does not always work. If we only say, John died, we still do not know how he died. He may have died because of illness, old age, or an accident. So, entailment here only works in one direction. John was killed means John died. Now, let's look at the conversation above. Shirley says, George regrets getting Mary pregnant. Jean replies, but he didn't get her pregnant. This sounds strange because the verb regret already implies that the action actually happened. For example, if I say I regret lying to my mother, it automatically means that I really lied to my mother. In the same way, the sentence George regrets getting Mary pregnant already implies that George got Mary pregnant. So, Jean's reply contradicts the entailment, and that is why the conversation sounds logically inconsistent. Before moving to the characteristics of entailment, this slide gives us some definitions from linguists. First, according to Goddard, entailment is a relationship between two sentences where the truth of one sentence implies the truth of the other because of the meanings of the word involved. This means that entailment happens naturally from word meaning, not from grammar only. Next, Georgia Jew says, An entailment is something that logically follows from what is asserted in the utterance. In simple words, when we hear a sentence, our brain can automatically understand another meaning that logically follows from it. Finally, Percy explained that entailments are inferences based on our semantic knowledge. This means that because we understand relationships between words, we can communicate more meaning than what is directly spoken. So overall, all these definitions show that entailment is about hidden logically meaning inside language. Next, this slide explains an important characteristic of entailment, which is transitivity. The slide says, if X entails Y and Y entails Z, then X entails Z. Let's understand this through the example. First, sentence. Some boys ran down the street entails some kids ran down the street. Why? Because every boy is a kid. The word boy is more specific, while kid is more general. Next, some kids ran down the street entails some kids went down the street. DC, because running is one of type of going. If someone runs somewhere, they must also go somewhere. So now we combine both entailments together. If boys are kids and running is a kind of going, then some boys ran down the street also entails some kids went down the street. This example shows that entailment can continue step by step through logical meaning relationships. Now, this slide continues to show the relationship between hyponymy and entailment. First, the slide gives us an example about flowers. The general word here is flower, while tulip, rose, and daffodil are more specific kinds of flower. So if someone says, this is a tulip, we automatically understand that it is also a flower. This is because every tulip belongs to the flower category. In other words, the meaning of the word flower is already included inside the word tulip. The slide also gives another example about colors. The general category is red, and words like scarlet, burgundy, and claret are more specific shades of red. So if someone says, this flower is scarlet, we immediately understand that the flower is red as well. That happens because scarlet is a specific type of red. So from both examples, we can see that hyponymy often creates entailment from a more specific meaning to a more general meaning. Now, this slide explains one-way entailment. The example says, Alfred saw a bear. If this sentence is true, then we can definitely say, Alfred saw an animal. Why? Because a bear belongs to the animal category. So if Alfred saw a bear, he automatically saw an animal too. However, the opposite is not always true. If we only hear the sentence, Alfred saw an animal, we still do not know exactly what animal he saw. It could have been a cat, a dog, or another animal. So we cannot conclude that he saw a bear. That is why this type is called one-way entailment, because the relationship only works in one direction. The slide also explains that this usually happens because of hyponymic relationships between words. In this example, bear is the more specific word, while animal is the more general word. So, one-way entailment is asymmetrical. Okay, next. This slide gives more examples of one-way entailment. The first example says, I bought some roses. If this sentence is true, then we can also say I bought some flowers. This is because roses are a kind of flower. The second example says, John ate my biscuits. This entails someone ate something. Why? Because John is person. So in the more general sentence, he becomes someone, and biscuits are things, so they become something. So the second sentence is more general than the first one. And the third example says, Paul killed Bill. If this sentence is true, then Bill died. Must also be true, because the meaning of the verb kill already includes the idea of death. At the bottom of the slide, there is a simple test for entailment. If sentence A is true, then sentence B must also be true. And again, all these examples show a one-way and asymmetrically relationship because the opposite direction does not always work. Now we move this slide. Introduces two-way entailment. Unlike one-way entailment, this relationship works in both directions. That means if the first sentence is true, the second sentence must also be true. And if the second sentence is true, the first sentence must also be true. So the entailment is mutual. Because the relationship works both ways, two-way entailment is symmetrically. Two-way entailment is symmetrical. Okay, next to this slide reminds us that one-way entailments usually come from hyponymic relationships between words. For example, a rose is a kind of flower, a bear is a kind of animal. So if we say I bought roses, we can conclude I bought flowers. But the opposite does not always work because flowers can include many other kinds, not only roses. That is why one-way entailment is asymmetrical. This slide explains that two-way entailments often appear in paraphrases and relational antonyms. First, paraphrases. Paraphrases are different sentences that express the same meaning. So if one sentence is true, the other is also true. Second, relational antonyms such as sell and buy, lend and borrow, own and belong to. For example, if we say John sold a car to Anna, we can also say Anna bought a car from John. Both sentences describe the same event from different perspectives. So this is an example of two-way entailment. Now this slide talks about contradiction. A contradiction is a sentence that must be false because the meanings of the words conflict with each other. Let's look at the examples. First, this animal is a vegetable. This sentence is contradictory because an animal and a vegetable are completely different categories. So something can not be both and at the same time. Second, Sam is older than himself. This is impossible because one person cannot be older than themselves. Third, the baby is lifting a 1,000-ton package. This sounds contradictory because a baby is physically too weak to lift something that heavy. So all these examples are necessarily false because of the meanings of the words involved. Okay, now this slide explains analytically or necessarily true sentences. These are sentences that are always true because of the meanings of the words, not because of real world situations. For example, cats are not vegetables. This sentence is automatically true because the meaning of cat is completely different from the meaning of vegetable, so we do not need to check reality to know the sentence is true. That is why it is called an analytic or necessarily true sentence. Next, this slide talks about synthetic or contingent sentence. Unlike analytic sentences, these sentences depend on reality. That means they can be true in one situation but false in another situation. Their truth depends on how the word actually is. So synthetic sentences are based on real-world facts, not only on word meanings. This slide gives some examples of synthetic or contingent sentences. First, keep to the left. This sentence is true in England because people drive on the left side of the road there. But it is not true in Vietnam, where people keep to the right. So the truth of a sentence depends on the real word and different countries. Second, it often rains a lot of England. To know whether this sentence is true or false, we need real world knowledge about England's weather. Third, John is from Ireland. We also cannot know if this is true or false just by looking at the words. We need information about John in real life. So these examples show that synthetic sentences depend on our knowledge of the world, reality, and real-life facts, not only on word meanings. Thank you everyone for listening. We hope our presentation helped you understand sense relations and how meaning works in semantics.